Hey everybody, Eric Hayden here in the garden doing some cleanup after Tropical Storm Isaias moved through eastern North Carolina, made landfall as a hurricane down toward just west of Wilmington, Ocean Isle Beach. We did a quick video yesterday showing the prep for the storm itself. Not much you can do other than, again, most of our roses are staked. Like we saw with Florence, you could take the roses down lower, cut them back, maybe even take off some leaves to reduce the damage, but with this storm we didn't do that. We left the roses staked. We had a gust to about 64 here at the at home. You can see one of the cosmos is knocked over. That's not a big deal. It's interesting when you do a quick survey of your yard, you often miss something the first time around. The first good news, we did pick up 1.7 inches of rain, so that's really good. And overall, the garden fared pretty well. I'll show you some examples. Maybe pretty hard to see in the video. You can see the storm got in and out as predicted. The wind and rain was last night, real loud night. But by about 5 in the morning, we were perfectly okay in terms of the winds dying down. So when I first saw the garden, I didn't notice too much. A few roses leaned over. I certainly noticed the Cosmo blown over. But unfortunately, I noticed more damage now that I'm doing this video, and I kind of did another glance. I'm not quite sure if you can see it, but the trellis itself is leaning over. Not a huge deal, but this Dublin Bay took a beating. It's interesting, on the right side it's growing more because it has a southern exposure, and the left one gets a lot of sun, but not I guess as much as the one on the right. But anywho, our winds were coming from this direction, from the southeast, and it snapped off a large section of this. I didn't notice it at first, but this is a huge cane, and I'm not exactly sure how it happened, but it came from this base down here, from the bud union itself. And as I pull it back, you can see it's a very substantial, thick cane. It's very, very healthy, and the unfortunate thing is it's one of the longer ones that was with this climbing rose. So not a huge not a huge thing that I didn't expect when you get a rose this tall. It's got a big exposure to the wind. I guess the saving grace with this, again, I'll just have to chop this up. You can see a large section of the rose is now missing, but this will come back pretty good as we get into the latter part of the summer. At least it's a climbing rose, and the recovery should be pretty quick, as opposed to something that takes a while to grow. I forget the name of these lilies again, canna lilies. A couple of those got flattened. That happened in Dorian. These things are, man, they're super healthy. They have been transplanted a couple times, and sometimes they sprouted up even when I didn't want them. Neighbor lost a tree in the yard next to us. So again, all of us varying degrees of damage, but for the most part, not as much as they saw down near the actual landfall. Here's another example. This is Louise Estes, just pushed over. I'll inspect it here as we get into the next couple days. Claire Elise blew over. It was staked up, but again, I don't know if you can tell, but it's kind of at an angle. I'll usually just let the roses be for a couple days. And I mentioned in a prior video, I won't really pull them back up. I'll leave them crooked like that, restake them so they've got support, but they will eventually correct themselves in terms of growing straight. Here's another example, and this poor Mr. Lincoln, this is the second time this has happened. This has gotten knocked down quite a bit. This is on Fortuniana, so it was staked, but it looks like that broke off. So this has been pushed this way, and now you can fully see the bud union. But what's very, very interesting about this is, notice how this much older cane is going this way. So Florence knocked it this way. I let it, so you can see how crooked that bud union is. I let it be, staked the canes to the pole again. It grew straight, and now you can see it's been bent back the other way. So and what I mean by that is I won't try to lift this up too much. It's already leaning that way, so I'll just kind of let it be and re-support it. So I'll take these canes, might lean it up slightly, but you can see this whole thing has shifted quite a bit in the ground. So I'll re-support it where it is now, and these canes are crooked, but then they'll start to correct themselves as the plant naturally grows toward the sun. But you can see that has been disturbed quite a bit by the wind. Initially, it's just very interesting. From Florence pushing it that way, it corrected itself, and now it's been blown the other way. That's the price you pay when you live down by the beach. As far as this garden is concerned, not a lot of issues. They were much smaller. So that gets to the point about, if you're trying to prevent things from happening, lowering the size of the bush will certainly help. These bushes are looking pretty good. They're pretty mature. They've been through Florence and Dorian and now Isaias. The interesting thing about this, I didn't notice it too much because my wife did some deadheading, but the blooms got sheared off. When I was walking in the garden, I was walking over here and I noticed they're scraggly looking now. They were much more prolific blooms because they weren't having shrunk down because of loss of water. But that's a Veteran's Honor. It just snapped off at the top. There's another Veteran's Honor there. So just some minor damage on most of those. You can see one of the poles I use snap. Those are the fake bamboo ones with a little bit of metal. I prefer the conduit because they're not going anywhere. So for the most part, things not too bad. The biggest hurt seems like the Dublin Bay and also the Mr. Lincoln. I mentioned these fake green bamboo looking poles that do have some metal support. I don't recommend those too much. You can see why this snapped over, so that's not going to support anything. I only use those to maybe support the outer edges of some canes, but when I want to support in the middle of the bush, I really like this conduit pipe, and you can see some older bush videos I've made on that. But you can see some of these bud unions have moved quite a bit, and instead of moving it all the way over and restaking and fighting it, I just let it flop where it is, reattach it to the conduit, and let things be. They will eventually grow straight again. The thing I did notice during Florence, I did a tour of the garden, and I didn't notice too many issues. Some completely bent over and died right away. So some issues were more obvious. But what I did notice with Florence is if a rose got heavily knocked over one way, it may have some underlying damage to the main roots under the ground. And in that case, it would eventually perish within the next couple weeks. Here's Louise Estes, pretty bloom for having been through a big tropical storm. It got knocked back just a little bit. But again, overall, not many issues, especially the roses that were shorter. And a lot of this is from Let Freedom Ring. Just notice this cane, and this is what you'll see through the garden, just random canes laying there. That's a pretty healthy cane. It's a couple feet long, and it just got snapped off and blown through the garden. And I can see it here too. This is not leaf litter from disease. This is all, that was a cane, that was a cane, anything with blooms on it. So the deadheading before helped. So trying to remove the blooms, making sure you're staked to something like conduit, and then in a drastic measure, and I wasn't going to do this for a tropical storm because you can see how much did survive. I didn't want to hurt the bush by hacking too much, but in a situation like Florence, where the wind was going to be a lot, I did lower the bush to prevent that rocking action. So that's it from the garden. Just wanted to do that quick update. It's time sensitive. Makes the most sense to do it now. And you can see that pretty crooked clear lease there. These mushrooms are jumping out of the garden after we finally got some rain, so that's interesting. So we'll do the process of cleaning up a little bit. I got to get the grass cut. And you can see again, the main issue with the roses was this Dublin Bay lost one major cane and some on the other side, but that should grow back pretty quickly. The other one I'm a little more worried about is that Mr. Lincoln, mainly because it got pushed one way during Florence. In fact, it was completely over in Florence. This is a new fence now, but the prior neighbors, this fence blew down into the garden and actually knocked, Mr. Lincoln, I said this one way, and Alina was knocked completely over as well. So since this is the second time it's happened to Mr. Lincoln, I'm a little worried with this much movement, here's the bud union. When you get this much rocking, in fact, unfortunately I can see it now. I don't know if you can see this at home, but here's the bud union itself, and this is why I don't want to move it around much more than I am now. It's actually cracked here in the middle. This is a pretty big cane, but you can see it is cracked down the middle. So I might tie that together and just hopefully it heals, and we'll kind of go from there, because that was one of the better rose bushes for sure. Hope everyone is doing well. I'll leave you with a nice view of the Carolina blue skies after the storm. Have a good one.